I want to say is that the last 2 days have been some really powerful discussions that's been taking place here around the topic of resilience, increasing extremes, and risk associated with that. And what we want this session tonight, we want to really focus the discussion from the perspective of academic leaders and the transformative role that they can play on this issue, but within the context of the challenges and opportunity of that role. For example, they operate on this stage of at the national, international, and local level. And from that perspective, again, they can influence change. At the same time, these leaders, and I use the term very broadly, not just the very distinguished leaders that we have here, but they oversee vast intellectual and physical resources that are geared towards creating new knowledge, discovery, not only from sort of basic research perspective, but from sort of a use-inspired perspective that's geared, by and large, I would argue, towards societal benefit. So how is that being used within the context of the things we've been talking about today, and what are the opportunities? So those are opportunities, yet our leaders face many challenges. Limited resources, political decisions that occur on a national, statewide, and local level that's constrain them, and the challenges of their own institution with respect to resilience in the wake of an event or planning long-term for the institution to be resilient within constrained resources. So we want to explore these challenges and opportunity in as much detail as we can in the time we have tonight. But not only the challenges and opportunities, I think what we also want to talk about, and I think our leaders will share with us, and facilitate a discussion here on strategies towards more resilient societies. But not only one-off strategies, but how do we scale that up? How do we scale that up at a larger level, nationally and internationally? So that's sort of laying the groundwork for the discussion that we'll have tonight. And what I'll do now is I will introduce our panel as soon as I can get to their bios, so I make no mistakes with names. And so Chancellor Rodriguez, I'll start with you. Chancellor Rodriguez took office as the 8th Chancellor of the City University of New York. With his appointment, Chancellor Rodriguez made history by becoming the first educator of color and first Latino selected as CUNY's Chancellor. CUNY is the nation's largest urban university comprising 25 campuses with an enrollment of over 275 degree-seeking students. Chancellor Rodriguez's distinguished career spans both academic and the public sector. He's a scholar, teacher, administrator, and former cabinet secretary for the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. Chancellor Rodriguez, your opening comment?
Well, thank you, and great to be in the panel with your friends. I want to thank the organizers. I just came in, so I have not been able to benefit from the length of the conference, but to President Rodriguez, his entire team here at UAlbany, I think we owe them a big round of applause for being phenomenal hostess and intellectual leaders. To all the sponsors, thank you for the support. The feedback that I've received from colleagues that I had a chance to talk to before the panel has been extremely encouraging in terms of the exchange, the ideas, the potential, all the things that you hope in a conference like this. I'd like also to give a shout out to all the good folks from the City University of New York who trekked all the way from New York City to make the trip here. So why don't you give yourselves a big round of applause? Thank you. Right. And have two of our presidents here in attendance. President Bill Fritz from the College of Staten Island. and President David Gomez from Ostos Community College. Thank you for being part of the conversation. This is one of the most important topics of this generation, right? And for universities not to be deeply engaged in the local work that we do, because we're citizens of the communities where our campuses are located. In many cases, we are part of the larger grid of responses to how your locality or localities address disasters and climate disasters. So we need to respond there too. But we're clearly, in the most important way, a large part of the solution moving forward, in terms of the intellectual capital, in terms of the knowledge that our faculty and our staff have in all kinds of areas. And I think one of the great kudos of this conference was the interdisciplinary nature of the conference, recognizing that there's not just a couple of disciplines that sort of are dominant in this area. So we need to be active and engaged in that kind of research. We need to be active in the translation of that research to public policy and to networks. And I think we have to also use the opportunity to educate our stakeholders about that role that we play, and use that as a way to be able to generate additional support for the work that we do. I think that this area of work is one which is easy to translate to the general public. Why is it important? The talent that we have in all our campuses is really quite phenomenal when you look at the faculty who are doing different kinds of things, and then to sort of use that as a teaching moment to talk to our funding partners, to the general public about that important role that university systems role play in the creation of knowledge, in taking that knowledge and connecting it to public policy, and then having that become something that improves the quality of life of the communities that we serve. So happy to be part of the panel.
Thank you, Chancellor. President Vélez Arocho. That was a test. I think I did okay. President Vélez Arocho is president of the Pontifical Catholic University of Puerto Rico. Previously, he served as chancellor of the University of Puerto Rico at Mayagüez. Mayagüez. Since 1972, he is a professor of decision science in the School of Business Administration of UPRM. He holds a PhD from the University of Florida, Gainesville, in management sciences. From 1986 to 1990, he was dean of the School of Business Administration of UPRM. And from 1992 to 2002, he was co-director of the Center for Hemispheric Cooperation in Research and Education in Engineering and Applied Sciences, and many other experiences that he has. President?
Thank you. First of all, I want to say that the person that is in the program is Chancellor Agustin Ruyan. He is the Chancellor of the University of Puerto Rico at Mayagüez, but he was unable to come to this conference. So you are not looking at Agustin. This is Jorge, the person who was here in the panel in the morning. This is really an honor to be part of this panel addressing this important issue. I think that, as was presented, there are opportunities and challenges. And I think that the most critical word in this statement for this panel is addressing risks. Because you can look at opportunities, you can look at challenges, but the critical element is how to assess risks. So I think that before an extreme event or disaster happens, universities, like those that are here in this meeting, can join together to create a platform through RISE, for instance, to develop assessment strategies, to understand more clearly the risks and vulnerabilities of our communities within particular cultural, social, and geographical contexts. This is an area that one size doesn't fit all. So it is extremely important to consider the cultural context, the social context, and the geographical context. And I think there are opportunities to develop strategies to share with this huge community of universities and organizations, really opportunities to share knowledge. I was really impressed with the centers that are present here that do research. I was really, really impressed. So develop strategies to share knowledge, experiences, resources, and probably one of the most important areas, shared databases. I mean, the problems are very complex, and I think that it is extremely important if we can develop platforms, strategies to share our databases so that we can work together. And I would like to follow Dr. Jorge Venegas' metaphor today in his presentation. Do not destroy our university silos. Do not destroy our university silos, but build bridges, stairs, or even tunnels, as he was mentioning, to communicate between our universities and our silos.
And thank you, President Arocho, for doing my job and explaining what the substitute that occurred. To my immediate left is Chancellor Johnson of the State University of New York. Chancellor Johnson joined the State University of New York as its 13th chancellor in September 2017. It serves more than 1.3 million students annually, employs more than 90,000 faculty and staff, and connects 3 million alumni from around the world. Immediately prior to joining CUNY, Chancellor Johnson was co-founder and CEO of Cube Hydro Partners, a clean energy infrastructure company focused on building and operating hydropower plants in North America. Chancellor Johnson grew the company from 1 plant to 19 plants on 10 rivers in 5 eastern states, enough to power 150,000 homes with clean energy. Prior to Cube Hydro, Chancellor Johnson served as Undersecretary of Energy at the U.S. Department of Energy. As Undersecretary, she was responsible for unifying and managing a broad portfolio of $10.5 billion in energy and environmental projects. Chancellor Johnson?
Thank you very much. I'm just getting over a cold, so can you hear me? You can hear me, okay. Thank you, Everett. Thank you, colleagues, and thank you all for being here. It's kind of a cold, rainy night. You could be home, resting, I don't know, decompressing after a long, productive day, and I'm so appreciative that you're here. I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to all the SUNY family that's here. Can I raise your hands? Yeah. And also 3 presidents that are here, of course, our host with the most, Dr. Javidan Rodriguez. Yeah. Dr. Marian Terenzio from Cobleskill. and Dr. David Rogers from Morrisville. I think that's the three, right? We did have Dave Amberg from ESF, so thank you all for being here. You know, I was here yesterday morning, and then we've had a Board of Trustees meeting, which will continue tomorrow. And I was really taken by Celio Ortiz Garcia's comments about building community, and that the grand challenge is not access to clean water or energy, clean energy, ending poverty, ending homelessness. It was really the challenge of coming together as a community, finding common ground, and moving forward. And I love that. And I don't know if Cecilio, are you still here? Yeah, thank you. Cecilio, yes. But I thought that was wonderful. So I just wanted to repeat that because I think that's right. And what I've been trying to think about so take that thought we all heard yesterday morning. And then last week I was out at California, the 125th anniversary of the department that I graduated from, the electrical engineering department at Stanford. No, I was not in the first graduating class. But it was interesting listening to some of my faculty members who've now since retired, the former chairs and deans. And you know, they talked about how silos communicate. And you know, if you think about over the last 40 years, which was when I graduated, so it was a while ago, and you think about the rise of, you know, the continuation of Moore's Law, and then the rise of our communication networks and our computer networks. You know, I was thinking, wow, there must have been great connection, bridges, tunnels, ladders between the chips that were being developed, driven by Moore's Law, and the systems people that drove communications and computers. But actually, the former dean of engineering got up and said, no, not at all. In fact, we really never talked to each other. But we had a roadmap. And we had a roadmap called Moore's Law that we knew was going to continue, and it did for 40, 50 years. So the systems people knew when the chips were going to show up. But he said, you know, we're now at a crossroads because we don't have a roadmap anymore. We don't have a roadmap because Moore's Law is starting to bend over. It's not continuing and those of you who may not know what it is, about every 2 years, 18 months, the size of the transistor shrink in half, so the speed doubles. And the cost then goes down. But that's starting to end. And then there was a roadmap that was done, the International Transistor Roadmap, the ITRS. And the last roadmap was done in, I think, in 2015. So they haven't had a roadmap. So listening to Cecilio, you speak yesterday, remembering the conversation from last week, it made me think what we need is a roadmap. When I was Undersecretary of Energy, and Everett referred to that, we did what was called the Strategic Technology Energy Plan, which is what would it take this country to go from where we were, and this was in 2010, a decade ago, to get to 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 relative to 2005. So we laid out a plan, we laid out a roadmap. And when I give talks, I actually go back to that roadmap and I say, here's what we did well, here's what we haven't done as well. I think now we need a new roadmap, one that's local. So you talked about experiences and you talked about geography and the importance of knowing locally what you need to do. But I also think the power of this conference is connecting us so that when we do something, we know that it's adding to what the community is doing. So when I decide, and I know this may sound trivial, but this is actually the point. I don't think there's a silver bullet, regrettably. I think it's going to take each and every one of us, and that's why the power of everyone in this room, because we represent millions of students, to change behavior. And how do we change behavior? We reinforce it by communicating what we're doing and encouraging and inspiring others to do the same. So every day we make a choice. I travel to New York City. Felos, you travel up from New York City. We're going to take the train or we're going to drive. If I take the train, my carbon footprint is less. In fact, I track all the miles that we drive in the carpool, and we've reduced by about 20,000 miles our transportation. Now, it sounds like a lot. It's okay. It's a start. Our carbon footprint for CUNY is about 1 million tons of CO2. Our goal is we are going to procure 100% of our clean electricity within the next few years from renewable energy and storage. That's our goal. We're doing the first phase of that. The second is we want to build every new building, make it zero net carbon. And we can drive what's called the mass timber building. For any buildings that go up to 14 stories, you can make them out of, of trees that have soaked up all the carbon they're going to soak up, and that they need to actually store that carbon so it doesn't go in the atmosphere. And the only way to do that is either bury it or you seal it and make buildings out of it. So those are the two things we're trying to do at scale. But I think what we all need to do is figure out a way how what you're doing, Felos, what you're doing, Jorge, what you're doing, Everett, and what everybody in this room is doing, to get together to create that momentum that inspires us to keep doing that. And I think that's our challenge. Thank you.
Okay, we still have more to go. So we'll go into the question part of the program, and those are already some very powerful and thoughtful comments. And so, and again, what we'll do is each panelist will take a question, and the others will have a chance to follow up. So, and I won't read. I'll just summarize the questions. I won't read them verbatim. They're in the program. So our first question is to Chancellor Rodriguez, and this question has to do with top challenges and opportunity for higher education, kind of what we're talking about, but with a focus on challenges and opportunity in the race really to safeguard our global community against increasing extremes, et cetera. Chancellor Rodriguez.
Well, thank you. I mean, clearly a broad question. So let me take a stab at it. By layers, right? So I think that there is one layer of responsibility that we have as stewards in our campuses to think about what does it mean on the campus, right? To be ready, right? And echoing what Chancellor Johnson said, to be part of the larger solution, right? So I think it's a first layer of analysis that we need to do. It's tough to be out in partnerships in other parts where you have not done your homework in your own, in your own campus. So that's, I think, one first layer of inventory that all of our institutions of higher ed need to do, and that's going to mean different things depending on where you are, location. And in the case of CUNY, we have campuses that have an ocean front. They're going to have a different kind of vulnerability to something like Superstorm Sandy when we had it in the city several years ago. Vertical campuses. So that's, I think, one first layer of work. And it is work when you're talking about campuses that are old. I mean, it's great to have the vision about what we're going to do with the new construction, but the footprint that we inherit is 60, 50 years old, right? And making those changes doesn't come at an affordable price, right? I think there's a second layer, which is many of our institutions are tied to the emergency response that our cities or our state or our regions, develop to deal with these things. So we need to be both leaders in making sure that all those networks are always, sort of refreshing, that they are looking at a new technology, a new way of doing things, that your preparedness is vital. I mean, in the case, for example, of CUNY, we have some campuses that are in flood areas. We have some campuses that are shelters. And we have some campuses that are part of the emergency response, and so we have that layer of responsibility to make sure that we're up to date and we're leaders in our communities in that partnership. Then we need to use our intellectual capital that comes from our faculty to make sure that those systems and the larger systems that we belong to are also up to date and with the best current thinking that we can provide. And that's where supporting our faculty, I think, becomes crucial. And in the case of CUNY in New York City, we've seen it with investments of research of our faculty guiding the city about how to protect wetlands and dunes and marshes and areas to protect the coastline from surges. Work that some of our campuses do in Jamaica Bay, which is next to Kennedy Airport, for those who are not familiar with New York City. I mean, all those things we need to. Many of our faculty are some of the key individuals that the city and the state and the region relies on, and the country relies on expertise to make sure that. So we need to support that work. And we need to have our city and states recognize that we have that talent in our universities, and that we need to support their research so they can continue to be supportive of the work that we do there. We also have, in the creation of knowledge, and the research is in our curriculum, in the work with our students. I mean, we have now students that want to know about these fields. They want to be able to have careers in these fields because they want to be part of the solution, right? Is our curriculum up to date? Do we have the latest thinking? Do we have the latest level of partnerships to be able to be at the cutting edge of research? And then there's the layer of the regional, national, and global networks that we all belong to, right? Which come to the rescue when we are affected and we cannot maybe respond when we can, and we need help from others. And then when we can provide assistance, we've seen that in the case here of New York, in recent situations like in the Bahamas, situation in clearly in Puerto Rico, almost 2 years ago. So I think that inventory is part of the checklist of preparedness that you want to have. Each of those layers has spokes of complexity in terms of the different areas that you might want to go into. Again, I want to stress the interdisciplinary nature of this work. It's easy to immediately go into environmental studies, to go into some of those fields as the ones that you think about more immediately. But we have faculty researching, for example, the effect on mothers who are pregnant and have sort of prenatal depression, right? All the babies that are born after climate, hurricane or a storm or something, right? Documenting the effect on the mental health of those children. So, I mean, you can go down the list in terms of the things that we need to be ready for, and so we need to be the supporters of that research, the supporter of the spaces for like the networks that Christina and Jorge mentioned. And again, I think one very important role, and this is something that I try to do, is remind, whenever I get a chance to remind the mayor, to remind the governor, to remind the commissioners, right, about that level of staff that comes from the faculty that we have, so that they allow the faculty to do their research, with the less level of bureaucratic entanglements, with the highest level of freedom, to be able to translate what they're learning concretely into public policy, working with our sort of NGO partners too, who sort of push in civil society. I think we also need to be, part of our roles is to be spokespersons and to be educators. And I think we lose an opportunity not to have the additional resources that need to have to make all these things happen when we don't remind elected officials, foundations, and others about that great capacity that they tap into, which is in our faculty.
Great, thank you, Chancellor. Chancellor Johnson, I'll start with you as a follow-up to add to.
Well, there's so many things there I couldn't agree more with, and I think I'm going to talk a little bit later, maybe even about convergent science. But when you talk about the research and technology that goes on in campuses, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Stanley Whittingham, who made this whole state of New York proud by winning the Nobel Prize in chemistry from Binghamton. And when you think about what he was able to do, is that he basically developed the rechargeable lithium-ion battery, which allowed us to do our mobile computing as well as bring renewable energy onto the grid at scale. So when we point to those, and I know you've all got millions of also examples like that, I think that reminds us of the power of the universities to bring to bear the kind of work that can really make a huge difference in the world. So I agree.
Yes, I was going to mention that I think it is important to remember that the forces of the market are always present in our environments. Many of our universities have industries, organizations that are our stakeholders, and they have things to say about the issues that we are presenting in this conference. Not only that, they could be really extremely good partners in our strategies to create the momentum that was expressed before. So, in order to reach our goals, I think that there is this challenge of how to work with the industries and the markets in order to work together to reach the goals that of our society related to disaster management and extreme weather events.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to the next question. And the next question, President Araujo, this one we'd like you to take the lead on. And this question has to do with leveraging our nation's research and scholarship around this whole issue of extremes and disaster. But really what we want to focus on in this question is how do we coalesce the academia and build networks and scale this up. So if you can address that question.
Yes, and I think this conference is an example of how to bring together universities, researchers, administrators, leaders of universities in order to create that community of persons and institutions interested in these issues. The risks are very, very high if we don't do it. So I think that the Chancellor Cristina was talking about this in our table a few moments ago. She was asking us, what will happen after this conference? What will happen? And I think it is not only an institutional question that we can answer from the point of view of our universities. I think it is a personal question. Each one of us should leave this conference tomorrow with the invitation of addressing the answer to this question. Is there an opportunity for me? Is there a role for me as a researcher, as a leader, as an administrator, to be able to create this community to address this issue?
Chancellor Rodriguez?
I mean, I'll mention a couple of things that come to mind, and I think in that spirit of sort of creating collective spaces that either allows to respond to crisis or to be ready. I'll say two things. You know, one, for example, the experience of CUNY with Superstorm Sandy. One, I think fascinating byproduct of the learning process that we went through was the large number of our students that were volunteering in different kinds of disaster relief, cleanup, and all those things. As a result of that mobilization of our students, in many cases supporting fellow students that were living in areas that were heavily impacted by the storm, but just sort of being, good citizens. And remember that, as part of our mission in the public good is the whole civic engagement, which we sometimes don't fully, we don't embrace as loudly as we should. CUNY developed something called the CUNY Service Corps, right, which was a model of paid internships, which we all know in the literature for career engagement, how important they are for students, and particularly for the kinds of students that we serve in CUNY that tend to come from low-income households or first-generation college that don't have the work networks that other students may have, and organize them to serve and work with community-based organizations that were helping in the aftermath of Superstorm Sandy, right? So there was an initial creation of service, which is part of our DNA as a public institution. And we did it in a way that was beneficial for the students in terms of, they get paid, right? So it comes in handy with some of the other issues that we're tackling on food insecurity and transportation, the other things that we have to do. But they were concretely engaging the community, responding to what the community needed, and it was a great model of service that we have continued. And actually, when we were invited by Governor Cuomo to try to be helpful in Puerto Rico, we used that model to quickly get organized to send students, which along with the SUNY students that were in Puerto Rico for the past 2 summers. So you have there a very concrete collective structure of support, of response, doing what we do best, which is supporting our students too, and instilling in them civic engagement. So for them, that's one model of things that were a response to a crisis that have become institutionalized for us, that came in handy in having solidarity in another crisis. One other example that I think about too is the other role of academia, right, which is the role to highlight when things go wrong, right, which is our less simpatico role, right, and is to be able to, when things happen, like in Puerto Rico, right, it's no. The number of people that have died is not the number that is being told there, and we need academics that have the credibility to come in and point that out, because that is not a trivial data point, right? That is really, really important. When I think, and I'm thinking back in the case of Puerto Rico, when FEMA is going to distribute money, if the families that have been affected do not hold the property title for their homes, right, they're not going to be able to receive the aid that they get, right? So that's where we need our lawyers, our law students to come in and be supportive of that work. So there's all this other additional talent, the social workers, right? All those that we have in abundance in our campuses that we need to also think about mobilizing in a situation of crisis.
Chancellor Johnson, anything on this particular question?
I just add briefly that I think one of the things that we can do is, as you're saying, to leverage our resources and in a way figure out maybe how to use behavioral economics to get people to do the right things sooner, right? So I do think that's something that we can figure out. And if anyone's interested in talking about that, I'd love to afterwards, because I'm intrigued by how we might do that. The last thing I'll say is, so I've been giving talks since I was an undersecretary about trying to mitigate catastrophic climate chaos. So when I used to give these talks, and I'm going to come back to something that you said, President Jorge, I would ask everybody in the room, how many of you think 100% probability that humans are responsible for catastrophic climate change? How many of you raise your hand in this room? How many? 100%. Okay. How many people think 50% probability that humans have something to do with catastrophic climate change, right? And yeah, I generally see more hands come up. And then I'd say, how many people think maybe there's 16% chance that humans might have something to do with climate change? Everybody raises their hand, and it comes back to what you said about risk. I said, okay then, you just all said there's at least a 16% chance. And you may say, why did I choose 16%? Because when you play Russian roulette, that's the probability there's a bullet in the chamber you're going to pull the trigger on. And that's bringing home risk in a very graphic way. And I think you're right. We need to be thinking about risk and what we can do to get people to appreciate the risk of not doing something to prepare for a disaster that might come, like leaving or preparing for a hurricane.
Okay, great. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll open up to the audience, and then we'll end with our fourth question to everyone. Chancellor Johnson, we were talking at the table about breaking down silos, disciplinary silos. This is a question along those lines. So it's the growing importance of convergent science and as a means really for addressing these grand societal challenges of climate change, which don't respect our disciplinary silos. So how do we, could you address that question and how
Sure. So just real briefly, when I started my career, which was about 85, most of the science done in this country was one investigator, one graduate student, one research contract. Now, you may have a very large group, but then you'd probably have 5 or 10 grants. It wasn't multiple professors, multiple graduate students working in teams. That shifted with, actually it was a State of the Union address by then President Ronald Reagan, who said, we're losing our ability to manufacture in this country. We need to teach students different. We need to figure out a way to do cross-disciplinary research, to get out of the silos. So they created the National Science Foundation Engineering Research Centers, and then we've had a swing towards ERCs and STCs and all the different acronyms. So I think we really pioneered in this country a very team-based approach. Then the academy had to kind of come along because now you're having people try to get tenure, but they weren't successful in their particular discipline. I think one thing we can do here is all of us that are deans, provosts, is to find a way to value cross-disciplinary research, team-based science, convergent science and research when it comes to tenure. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing, and I think the second thing is that we need to appreciate that you're really not going to contribute to a team unless you are deep in your discipline. Right. So I think there was a talk earlier today I heard about at the table, which is don't get rid of silos, but as you said, build those bridges, build those tunnels, build those steps. So I think that's right too. So 2, we still have to demand rigor in the particular area. 3, I think the challenges and opportunities, when you can tie them to seeing that outcome, whether it's developing a new product or bringing on clean energy onto your campus or seeing a change and making that visible, people get excited and they come together. What I love about this is that no matter, and look, we're all pretty competitive academics or we wouldn't be where we are. But every time one of us in the room wins, we all win, which is wonderful.
Thank you. Couple of quick follow-ups, and then, because I want to go to audience question. President Arocho?
No, I was going to say that hearing Chancellor Cristina, I think it's very, very important to have environments that are open and that enhance creativity for those persons that could really find the unique solution or the unique strategy. So always keep in mind that there could be people in our organizations that can really do something very, very special.
Chancellor Rodriguez, anything quick?
No, let's open it up.
Okay. We have one more question, but we're going to save that question for the end. So now let's open it up to the audience. We have runners with mics.
Hi, my name is Brad Hershenson. I'm a graduate student in the College of Homeland Security, Cybersecurity, and Emergency Preparedness at UAlbany. And my question is, as students, what can we do to best arm ourselves and our campus communities with the elements of resiliency and the best practices of emergency management, and really utilize the strategic partnerships we have as students in the classroom to best move forward with the best practices we've learned this week?
Well, that is a great question. Thank you, Bradley. So I think one thing is, as you engage with your awesome administration here, is supporting their efforts to build that college, to build the awareness among the students. And one of the things we're toying about is, is there, with micro-credentialing and certificates, is there a way that students could link together perhaps and take different courses and get a certificate in emergency preparedness or disaster recovery or, clean energy, for example. So maybe that's something that we can work on together.
So thank you, Bradley. So a couple of thoughts. First, to the students, keep voting with your feet, right? Because we notice, right? So if you are attending classes and you are majoring in different things and you're minoring in different things and you're coming with suggestions of programs that we need to have additional flexibility in courses, we do listen. Right, so I think it's important that power in terms of driving the agenda based on what generationally might be of interest is it's one key way to advance the agenda.
Yes, I think that the input from the students is extremely important for administrators. Extremely important. So think about ways of communicating your ideas, and I would say preferably without any constraints. In other words, I'm sure that you have the ideas. So communicate them to the person that could make them part of your education, of your training, or the strategies of the curriculums of your institution.
Other questions?
Yes, hi, good evening. My name is David Galarza, and I'm Puerto Rican from New York City. Thank you for this panel. I really appreciate everything that's been shared so far, including the attempts by CUNY to go toward a clean energy future, but it contradicts, unfortunately, what the Chancellor represents to me and to many Puerto Ricans, which is that she was on the board of AES, a company called Applied Energy Services that was poisoning Puerto Rico for many years, and they still have a pile of toxic ash in Puerto Rico. She earned hundreds of thousands as a director and continues to hold $2.6 million in investments in that firm. So I'd like for her to at least, I'm sure she already resigned from the board, but publicly if she could acknowledge that this company poisoned Puerto Rico, continues to poison Puerto Rico, and that she would indeed divest from AES to make the situation right, and maybe perhaps invest that money in things that actually can help Puerto Rico.
Okay. Another question?
Hi, my name is Ramon Bueno. I'm from Somerville, Massachusetts. I'm not part of CUNY or SUNY or Pontifica. I had a question. In light of the conversations that have been going on in the last day, today, and what I've heard in the panel, if RISE becomes what it really has the potential to be, the role is not just in disaster response and emergencies and sending students in a great role and all that, but in a more ongoing role way before anything happens. So one question I had, I'm not an academic, but one of the things that comes to mind is when things go back to, quote, normal, everybody has their career, their incentives, their disincentives, and all that kind of stuff. What do you see being necessary and possible for academics who are attracted to what might come out of a network like RISE that may not be in the traditional incentive reward structure of academics who have their, they have their pressures to get their grants, to get their this and that. This may be a little bit more a side stretch, and I'm curious how that would play out in institutions like yours.
You know, I think it's a great question, and you know, I think again, being committed. What I feel is there's certainly a lot of passion in the room, a lot of real interest in solving this problem, and I think that all of us, in addition to our research and our teaching and our scholarship, do professional service, and that's part of being part of this great community. So I would say that, you know, this is really part of being a faculty member in a modern university. But I applaud your being here and the effort that you're all putting into making this happen for the betterment of the country.
I'm a glass half full kind of guy, and I like to think that even when sort of your scenario, when things go back to normal, I think that there's a level of awareness, there's a level of commitment that I think will remain even when you do go to, you know, whatever normal might be, which is changing every day. So I'm a bit more optimistic about in the traditional routes, this being work that is valued, supported, appreciated, and finding a niche even within more disciplinary spaces. But you know, there's also then academic leadership, right? And then there's the role that department chairs and deans and all that have in if those things tend not to play out, to take the corrective steps that might be necessary to be able to continue with that work. But my sense is, and this is something, you know, I have not participated in the conference, but I heard many comments from faculty and colleagues when I came in today about how special this space was, how it either provided sustenance for things that were ongoing and beginning and they're ready to go to the next level, whether they saw the seeds for new things to emerge. So I am a bit more optimistic that even in that new normal, this will continue to be space work that would be value rewarded, and it would be sort of win-win scenarios.
We had a panel last week in our university to address the issues of infrastructure and environmental issues. And we invited probably the most respected researcher in Puerto Rico in earthquakes. And as I was mentioning today in the morning, suddenly the issue changed from hurricanes to earthquake. Why? Because during the past 500 years, about every 100 years, a large earthquake hits Puerto Rico. And the last one was 1918. So there was this discussion. And we were talking about exactly the same things, but we have other priorities, we have other things in our institutions. So this researcher brought a map where 5 communities are located in Puerto Rico. 5 communities. And each one of those communities has about 25,000 persons living there. And he was mentioning, if there is a small tsunami, 100,000 persons will die instantly because they don't have places to go. If there is a tsunami, the roads will be blocked. And then he said, imagine the front page of El Nuevo Día next day saying 100 Puerto Ricans died yesterday because of the tsunami. And this information is based on specific scientific and historic data. So when one thinks about going back to basics, I mean to the other things that we have, the other priorities, I think it is very, very important, as I was mentioning before, which are the possible disasters and which are the risks of not acting immediately.
Thank you very much. Another question? Other questions? Okay. I don't see any other questions, so let's go to the wrap-up. So final question for all of you. And Chancellor Johnson, I'll start with you, but I'll give you the question first. And it is your resilience legacy in 10 years. In 10 years, what would you like your legacy to be in higher education within the context of resilience?
I think there's a couple things. One is with regard to CUNY. What I'd like to see is that we've decarbonized the electric sector, that we've helped launch a mass timber industry in not only this state, but in the country, that we've helped figure out what are the processes and procedures that can accelerate a clean energy future. So, and then I think the last is as we build new buildings, that they be zero net carbon. And one of the things we've learned this last year is that you can design to gold standard or platinum LEED, but it doesn't mean that you're going to have less carbon. So what we've gone to is designing to silver, which is what we're mandated to do, but then each incremental investment, that we actually reduce the amount of energy that we use so that we limit the pollution. And then lastly, with regard to the students that graduate, that they are knowledgeable citizens of the energy they use and the environment they live in.
Thank you, Chancellor Johnson. President, what's your resilience legacy?
Two things. I think that I want to be able to help our university to be able to respond in the event of a disaster in Puerto Rico. In other words, to be able to deploy the resources of our university fast and effectively to help our communities. Secondly, I think that second component of this legacy would be to be able to convince them of the importance of anticipating what could happen, which requires research, planning, organizing, establishing priorities, and communicating. So creating that culture in our university, I think, will be part of my legacy.
Thank you. Chancellor Rodriguez, you have the last word. And your legacy.
So not a big fan of like legacy questions, because I think that when you have the privilege to serve in this capacity, it's about a collective vision that is generated together. So the personalizing makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable. But two thoughts, right? One is very concrete, but you know, when you're on a campus, your physical infrastructure matters, right? And you know, and we have challenges in that front because of infrastructure that is fairly old, right, and requires. So I would love that in 10 years, somebody will say, you know, they really prioritize in the system. Maybe less fancy new buildings, but really taking care of the ones that existed in a systematic way and in a way that it is environmentally responsible and allows to welcome students and faculty to facilities that we're proud of. Right. So that's on a larger scheme. I would love for the network of research and faculty that we have in our 25 campuses to be the go-to place when people want to deal with disaster resiliency urban issues, right? That the urban experts are clearly the faculty and the colleagues within the City University of New York, and that we've done our job well enough that there's a profound partnership with the city and with the state, and then also that we're able to lend that experience to other urban areas across the U.S. and internationally.
Thank you. So that does it. What I'd like to do is thank the audience for your attention. Thank you for your very thoughtful questions. And finally, I'd like to thank the panel for this